So welcome everyone, and thank you for taking the time to hear me talk about something that's been taking up much of my mental headspace for a while now. A small disclaimer before we start, since I'm also in Lebanon, like a lot of you, I may have to deal with connectivity issues, so I'm sorry in advance if I unexpectedly drop off. Also, I hope we can take this as an opportunity to discuss and strategize amongst ourselves for later about what kind of media landscape we want to see and support in Lebanon. Before I go into the nitty-gritty of this lecture, I think it would be good if we have a few definitions in mind to mitigate any sort of confusion. First, when I refer to the political economy of the media, I take here Vincent Mosco's definition to highlight the power relations, so emphasis on power, that shape and control the quality of the information communicated by the media to its publics. Disinformation is information that is deliberately false or misleading with the intent to cause harm. The harm doesn't necessarily need to be physical, but it can be. But it can also translate into anxiety, fear, doubt, and mistrust. And I think it's really important here to differentiate it from misinformation, which we understand to be unintentionally inaccurate or misleading information. So the differentiation between these both lies in the intentionality of it. And then finally, propaganda. I use Bruce Lane Smith's definition, which I think everyone knows this definition, whereby I see propaganda as communication that is used to influence an audience and further an agenda. It's also important to take into consideration that disinformation is oftentimes a key component of propaganda. Keeping all those terms in mind, I thought about how would I define the political economy of disinformation? So I came up with this tentative definition. I define it as the way in which power relations shape, fund, amplify communication of harmful and deceiving information from the media. And here I also include social media to its publics with the intent of sowing chaos and disorder. Now that we've established common terms and definitions, let's look at the legal infrastructure that institutionalized this phenomenon in Lebanon in particular. When it comes to the regulation of media ownership and production, two laws in Lebanon stand out. The first, passed in 1962, regulates media, so newspapers and magazines, and constrains the journalistic profession into a narrow definition. So when you look at the law, you would see, for example, that a journalist needs to be at least 21 years old, which is kind of weird because you can be a journalist whenever you want. You need to have a bachelor's degree in journalism or something close to it. It also provides a limited amount of licenses divided into two categories, so either political or non-political publications. This limitation, which is also applicable to the audiovisual law of 1994, which was basically written by Rafi al-Hariri, is meant to function as a sort of sectarian quota and creates a barrier for those outside its circle to apply for and get a political license. To this day, so when we talk about, let's say we talk about now online media and social media, to this day, it remains unregulated, but there is a draft law that's been discussed for the last 10 to 13 years that would basically enforce further limitations on journalists and content creators' free speech. The main takeaways from these laws are three. First, they're passed to benefit and prop up the sectarian and clientelistic system. They would ensure that ownership, influence, and control in the hands of the elite, so politicians, businessmen, and their families, and as like everything else in Lebanon, the media is a family business. And lastly, it basically sets journalists trapped within this current regulatory structure to fail at their job, which is supposed to prioritize public interest above all else, but it doesn't. In more practical terms, 12 families own or are on the board of almost half of Lebanon's media outlets. So this can be TV, print, radio, or online journalism. These families are basically in control of the information you and I receive and consume on a daily basis. it becomes really important for us to understand and chart out the incentives, power dynamics, and relationships between media, politics, and public, which is what I'm going to try to do in this next half of the talk, especially when it comes to propaganda and disinformation. But that also becomes very difficult when academic research in the region has not taken as much of an interest into disinformation as elsewhere, which is also a debate, but I'm not going to go into that. There are, however, some civil society initiatives that look into this phenomenon, but are usually limited in scope. So I looked to the US as a starter, since Western academia have invested much of its resources since 2016 to understand the spread of disinformation. 2018, Claire Ferris and Roberts proposed the propaganda feedback loop in their book, Network Propaganda, which is a very good book and available online for anyone who wants to read it for free. So the propaganda feedback loop holds three core assumptions. First, individuals will consume news to keep track of their political officials and of world events, and seek out sources of information that affirm their worldviews, so the ideologies and the beliefs that they hold true, and imbue those these sources of information with credibility. And this is applicable to every one of us. And I know this is definitely applicable to me. Second, elites ascertain control over their constituents by making sure that media outlets are giving them ample coverage of their identity confirming discourse. So when we talk about identity confirming discourse in Lebanon, it's clearly political sectarian discourse. And lastly, media outlets and journalists, and particularly partisan media outlets, are incentivized to keep broadcasting identity confirming discourse or run the risk of punishment. So punishment can either be audience drop off, they lose advertising money. In our case, it's political funding. Ben Claire Ferris and Roberts' model looks like this, whereby the media, politicians, and the public each play a role in the propaganda feedback loop. The spread of disinformation is sought by a public who hold it as true and confirming their ideological beliefs. The media is constrained by their business model and audience to respect and promulgate this discourse, and benefit from it to stay in control. So when we look at this model, which is a US-based model, we see a lot of commonalities, but there are definitely some realities that are missing here. So some components that are missing here that don't necessarily explain our reality in Lebanon or in the global South in general. Our contexts are a lot more complex and deserve further deconstructing. It also doesn't take into account social media manipulation, which is a huge component in the fight for public opinion in our region and in Lebanon. So I tried to think about a model for network propaganda that would be applicable to our local context. This model is based on my work at Meedan and years researching and observing the evolving Lebanese media landscape, the explosion of social media use, and the continuously changing power dynamics in the country and in the region. It kind of looks confusing right now, so I know how this would look like. It would look like something out of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And I know at first glance, it looks like I'm trying to pull things together that might not necessarily work, but bear with me as I will deconstruct each piece piece by piece. So let's start with the media and the public. The media's goals and incentives don't change from the propaganda feedback loop, but the one discrepancy here is in the public's relationship with the media. We know that trust in media is low, but we still depend on it because of its wide and far-reaching availability and accessibility. So it would be wrong to assume that, let's say, for example, Megaphone is rival to LBC or Al-Manar because we don't take into account that almost 30% of the population still doesn't have access to the internet. And also because not a lot of people speak the same language as Megaphone or seek out the same language or the discourse that Megaphone has. The role politicians play in our case is a lot more explicit. On one hand, they are able to utilize the sectarian clientelistic system to incentivize their loyal base to amplify support for their version of the truth. On the other hand, the laws passed to regulate print and audiovisual media gives them direct control over the information disseminated. But at the same time, this relationship and dependency on political funding shows us that the media landscape in its iteration today is incredibly fragile and unsustainable. We saw this happening with As-Safir, Future TV, and Al-Mustaqbal newspaper. And it's likely to happen again, which is why we see a lot of these media outlets trying to rebrand themselves or try to find new ways to fund themselves outside of the political funding scope. Partisan groups are then able to coordinate massive campaigns online to exaggerate public support of their narratives. We see that on Twitter almost daily when we look at trending hashtags and the media and how the media covers that behavior online as clickbait stories. It was only like 2 days ago that we see so much trending hashtags related to Ghada On and what happened with Ghada On, as if there was a lot of public support for her. And it's also important to mention these partisan groups' power on WhatsApp, but documenting the flow of disinformation is a lot harder due to it being end-to-end encrypted. If you remember, though, we saw this play out almost daily in their attempts to discredit the revolution in its first few months. So you would get voice notes almost on a daily basis, around 4 or 5 voice notes, trying to scare you from going down on the streets because there's always this fear that something was going to happen. And finally, and most importantly, we can't deny the power foreign countries have in influencing our political, economic, and social realities, either through the control they have over politicians or through the information operations we see on social media platforms that are aimed at misinforming the public. Information operations basically means basically funding an entire campaign of fake or disinforming traffic towards a certain hashtag, or they create their own hashtag. It can be made of bots or actual people who are paid and whose behavior you can tell is only activated, so they only tweet in certain times that align with a network of other Twitter accounts, and they tweet sometimes exactly the same thing. A lot of it is spam. A lot of it is very specific political narrative that is trying to basically sow discord or sow some kind of distrust against a political party or a political opposition that this foreign interest is trying to malign. So we see this a lot in Libya, for example, and we see it in Palestine, and I also saw it in Lebanon in the first few weeks of the revolution. Here, the responsibility, we need to hold social media platforms responsible for this because of their inability to protect their users from real-world harm, because their content moderation policies fall flat and are so vague that content takedowns usually don't take a long time. They take a long time to take down these information operations, but they are likely to take down content from independent journalists and people like you and me. So it's very complicated, and I know it looks pretty abstract, but I thought I'd give you a small example of how this would look like. So I took Baha al-Hariri as an example. It would have been really easy for me to apply this model to Hezbollah structure, but in my opinion, Baha al-Hariri is someone we should all be paying careful attention to as he tries to cement his place in the current political framework as elections are coming up. It's also a testament to the political elite's ability to rebrand itself and strengthen its control within the same network of influence. So Baha al-Hariri is not inventing a wheel. He's using the same wheel, just using different ways to do it. We should really take Baha al-Hariri's steady rise in influence by first seizing control over certain media outlets. So we see this in his partnership with LBC, with Sud Beirut International, with VDL News, and his creation of Al-Muntada Al-Ikhbari in November 2019, so less than a month since the revolution started. And we need to see this as a warning for us as a grassroots movement if we want to see change happen. And we want to see a quality of an information system that really matches our political reality in the future. So if there's anything I want you to take away from this talk is two things. One, don't underestimate the power the media have in making you fear and distrust the other. We saw it happen in 2015. We've seen it happen again in 2019. They also, so when they can't when you can't fear the other, they allow you to fear those who are more vulnerable than you, so refugees. And second, the political reality we want can be dissociated with the kind of media system we want. We see the media system today as a primary enabler network sectarianism, and it's important to know if we want to find a new political reality that we all belong to, we need to also find a different structure for the media. And this also includes a new legal structure for the media that would reflect quality and healthy information ecosystem. I'm wrapping up now. I just added further readings in case anyone is interested. I'll send them to Tamara later to send them to you. But I wanted to take the time now to answer questions, talk with you about, strategize together what would a political reality with a healthy media landscape look like.
For your talk. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Hella.
Okay, cool. Because like my internet just started to get bad. Like بس خلصتي حكي. Okay, so I have a few questions. Can you please write them in the chat box and I'll read them out for Azza. I mean, this is a very interesting topic, and this is something that I actually have been contending with, especially due to the fact that I became far more politically active after the October Revolution and the uprising. And you know, there was, and especially I've done because I was not in Lebanon, and most of my engagement was done through Twitter. It was really hard for me to come through what's genuine information and what is actual disinformation and propaganda. I have a few questions. Like the first question that I want to ask you about, you've talked about how a lot of that we have and we consume is actually owned by the oligarchy and the political class in Lebanon or their affiliates. And whenever we are as a grassroots movement, we're trying to change, we're always having to contend with these conspiracy theories about who are, you know, Zairan, there's like the thing of by embassies and all of that sort of political hijacking of the movement, and then like now it's bad, and you know, all of these things that it's such a possible rhetoric to debate against, because you're always, so how can we like use that sort of, you know, media attack against us to try and have a more a healthier relationship with some of the media sources that are out there?
So do you mean the mainstream media, the ones that are owned by these families?
Or how can we use other media that is more organic to try and contend against that rhetoric by the media owned by the families?
I think that's a very good question. Again, we need to go back to the idea that as individuals who are interested in grassroots movements, we want to try and appeal to a huge and big audience that is devoid of like that we don't care about the differences, we don't care about our sectarian differences and all of that. So it's very tricky. It's also very interesting about the kind of discourse that we want to take out in terms of the grassroots movement we want to build. When it comes to the mainstream media, it's really important to know that the mainstream media will not really look to you or cover you in the way that you want it to. Let's say as Jadid, okay? Jadid has rebranded itself as the TV of the revolution. But when you see, for example, in their news bulletin, it's sponsored by the banks. So their incentives are not really to be the media of the revolution. They're just trying to keep the audience there and rebrand themselves for a liberal, like a sort of liberal audience that is more likely to, yes, be okay or like agree with some of the things of the revolution, but still want this sort of discourse, soft-core discourse that is identity confirming. So I don't think we need to have any kind of I don't want to say any kind of relationship with them. I think we should, but I think we need to be very careful about the kind of relationship we have with these kinds of mainstream. When it comes to the discourse that we're putting out and the type of traffic that we want to put out and the type of, interest that we want to get from people, it's important to know our target audience. We won't be able to really be far-reaching if we want to just throw a wide net and let's say I want to reach everyone. That doesn't work because not everyone has very different priorities and very different worldviews. So if you want a small, it's as a secular club alumni and as a secular club member, it's really important to target students because we know students are the future of this country. As a student grassroots movement, your power is in riling up and bringing together different students from different universities, which Meda has done brilliantly over the last 5 years and continues to do amazingly today. It takes a lot of work to actually break through the information operations that we see on social media, let's say, because they are highly coordinated. They are very strategic. And Mahmoud Ghazayel is here and he can talk to you about that because he's an open source investigative journalist who looks at these things as well. There is a strategy to information operations, whether they're organic or whether they're paid. And this strategy counts on a huge amount of people tweeting at the same time, retweeting each other, and then really driving traffic. Sometimes it's spam, by the way. Sometimes it's actual tweets. But this is not the kind of discourse you want to do or you want to replicate. It takes a long time to actually break the barrier. And that's why we have so many obstacles in the media system right now that you feel like when you're talking to a small group of people, but that small group of people slowly it increases. And I think it's a waiting game, but I think it's a strategic waiting game that all of us need to really care about.
Okay, very much. Alfred has a question for you. He says, can you describe the media structure of Megaphone and how does it avoid interference?
So Megaphone is very transparent about the money they get, and they're also very transparent about how they don't allow any editorial interference. If you go on their website, they list their funders. Any other media outlet does not list its funders. I mean, when I say media outlet, I mean mainstream media outlet. If you go on Lebanon Debate, if you go on Al Jadid, if you go on MTV, MTV says on its calls itself an independent media outlet, whereas we know that they're funded by the Mur family. Megaphone is completely transparent about where they get their money from. They tell you, they list them all like, I don't know, 10 or 5 of them on their website, and they are very clear in saying we get this money so that we can keep on working, but they have no say in our editorial position. Megaphone is very clear about its politics, and it's very clear about its editorial decision. Misinformation and disinformation is not something that that is part of their structure at all. Bilaks, the complete opposite of what you'd see in mainstream media, because they're not afraid to create an opposition or create space for opposition voices to be covered, which you won't see on mainstream media.
I think Marwan has a question now, if you can unmute yourself.
Hello, thank you, Azza, for the really interesting talk. I have a question about the inside structure of the media companies and outlets. For example, how does the relationship between the workers inside the companies and the platforms affect their content? For example, I don't know how Megaphone is structured internally, but is the relationship between the workers and the hierarchy inside the organization, does it affect their content itself? And how influential is it for a vision of future media in Lebanon?
Do you mean by you want to talk about mainstream media, or are you talking about independent media specifically?
I was wondering more about does the relationship between the workers inside the companies themselves, does it affect their content in any way, since they're controlled by politicians in the end? But does the political economic vision affect their content? You know, so the relationship between the workers, does it like have an effect on their content in the end?
طبعا, for sure, because it's at the end of the day, it's their, it's their livelihood. If they don't stick to the line, and I'm talking about mainstream media here, okay? If they don't stick to the line that's set by the by higher editorial, by the editor-in-chief or by the people on the board, they lose their job, or they're at risk of losing their jobs. They have to stay within that line. So it's a huge risk to ask mainstream media to deviate from it. They need to become like hugely successful, like let's say Riyad Baisi, in order to be able to deviate from this discourse. But when we talk about other reporters, again, reporters in Lebanon are not protected like publishers and editors are. They don't have an actual union. The union is for editors. There are two unions in Lebanon, one for publishers and one for editors. So actual reporters are not necessarily protected. Now there is a movement to create an alternative syndicate to give them some sort of protections, but it's also not it's not official. So awalan, they don't have protection, so they need to so awalan, their working conditions are abysmal and they don't have very good money. They don't get very good money. And two, if they deviate from the mainstream discourse, خلاص, it's a warning for them, or they lose their jobs. It's different when we look at independent media. Each independent media have different internal structures. The public source, let's say, is more uses an anarchist worker-owned structure. Megaphone is different. So it really depends. But there is a lot more conversation that happens when you take away the influence of like the political economic influence of the money that goes into funding a media outlet, then it would, what it does, yani. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Okay. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Because I've heard about the نقابة الصحافة البديلة. Is it really something like, is it first registered with the government, and is it effective in creating a sort of defense for the ones who are involved in it?
It's not registered. It's still so it's a grassroots movement. It's something that we want to do, but it's not registered because you can't register it. Kaman, there are a lot of legal structures that don't allow you to do that. So a lot of these, and again, Kaman, these syndicates, like the publisher syndicates and the editor syndicates, they don't also take into account freelancers. So freelancers don't have any kind of protections. The alternative syndicate tries to do that. But again, yani, it takes a long time to actually achieve any kind of protection when you're not registered or seen as legal by the state.
Hello, I wanted to ask a question. I wanted to raise my hand, but I can't find the button, so I'm just gonna ask my question here. I just wanted to go back further, to the disinformation point, because I feel like we underestimate disinformation and its availability in our society. I think Lebanon would be a perfect case to study about the impact of disinformation. Ishad al-Hayek, he's a historian. He describes very well how our whole history, the one we are taught at school, is filled with inconsistencies and historically and factually wrong stories that we all think make up our Lebanese identity. And so my question is, how do we go about fighting disinformation in Lebanon when even the historical, factual truth we are taught in schools and the ones we true change is tainted with disinformation, and that is confirmed through media outlets today and through the disinformation structure of digital disinformation as we see it today. So how do we start, and how do we go about analyzing something like this, even when Arabic content is not as easy to monitor as English or French or any other language that has a lot of researchers there to get involved? So this is my question.
That's a very good question. Thank God we have a fact checker in the Zoom meeting. محمود, حابب تحكي شوي عن شغلك كفاكت checker؟
Hello everyone, مرحبا جميعا. يعني أنا جاي كشخص عم يحضر مش عم يشارك.
بعرف، بس أنت كتير مهم بالشغل اللي نحن بنعمله.
يعني بنحاول قدر المستطاع. يعني هيدي المشكلة يلي عزة حكت فيها بأنه the politicians are controlling the media and most of the time with their own people, the bots that they are buying, they can silence other people and they can silence the truth. So لما يكون في أي خبر عم ينتشر ونكون نحن، يعني أنا جزء من مجموعات كبيرة من الأشخاص عم تعمل تكذب خبر معين، يعني بأبسط الأمور خدوا مشكلة الجراد يلي هلأ كل الناس عم تحكي عنها. يعني وزير الزراعة قال ما في شي بيخوف، وحتى المسؤولين بالزراعة اللي من سوريا للعراق قالوا ما في شي بيخوف. ولكن في مجموعة أشخاص بلبنان بده يحركوا الجو بطريقة معينة، لا إما يبيعوا مواد كيماوية زيادة مثل ما صار على بداية كورونا، ويعملوا أبطال بأنه نحن نكافح الجراد ونكافح كورونا، كرمال يعني يسجلوا هيك some political goals and gains here and there. ونفس الشيء عم نشوفه هلأ مع political parties that are starting to launch their own COVID vaccine campaign because they want to set some political gains from it. Disinformation is much more difficult in Lebanon than misinformation, but this isn't the main issue only in Lebanon. Like, it's a worldwide problem.
Yeah, it's a
but we can
problem. But the issue here كمان محمود، سوري إذا قطعتك، بس لأنه حطيت إيدك على كوفيد وأنا صار لي زمان بدي بس أعيط على حدا أقول له إنه the thing about COVID disinformation in Lebanon was that they started with أولاً they made us get scared of the vaccines for months. Right? So you see it on OTV, they bring a herbalist to OTV and to say that mRNA vaccines will change your DNA or something like that. On Al Jadid, they bring a panel so that they can discuss the credibility of these vaccines. On NBN, you see the same thing. So you had this coordinated disinformation campaign that was meant to do one and only one thing: make you to be scared. Be scared of anything. And that's the biggest power of disinformation, in my opinion, and specifically in Lebanon. And this is why also we do not have a very consistent historical narrative. And it's for you to be scared of the other. When it comes to COVID, it was a tool for them to then say, I'm a hero, I'm bringing my own COVID vaccines, and I'm going to vaccinate my people. You see this with Hariri, you see this with the Lebanese forces, and you see this also with different other people that are bringing their own vaccines. And مش بس هيك، بس also بالمساعدات اللي عم بيجيبوهن أو عم بيوزعوهن من أكل ومصاري وكل هالقصص اللي عم بتصير هلأ with the economic crisis. The problem lies with them because they create the problem, and we can't solve the problem through this system. You solve the problem when you try to find a way to get rid of yourself of this convoluted, sophisticated system that's been in place long time before the Civil War. It's been in place since the independence of this country, since the creation of this country. So it's an art journey for us to actually talk about a unified history or a unified historic discourse. It's a long, arduous journey for us to actually find a solution for a healthy information ecosystem. And 3, it will be a long journey for us to reconcile the differences and the pains and the traumas that this disinformation machine of a government, of a regime, has fed into us for over 30 and 40 and 50. So it's a huge issue in Lebanon. Yes, it's a huge issue in the world. And this is something that we need to really reckon with. You know, disinformation is not something to trifle with. It kills people. It really does kill people.
I think I have a question that goes along these lines, especially when, disinformation kills people. I mean, we've literally seen it on the streets of I can think of America with the KKK and people actually driving, their cars and hitting other people with them. What's quite interesting for me is how, so in social media, we are usually living in these echo chambers, where most of the information that we're consuming, it goes in line with our worldview and rarely challenges this worldview. And my question is, how can we actually come through the high intense volume of information that's poured into our social media in times of high emotional intensity, like stuff, for example, the 4th of August or the beginning of the revolution, and whatnot. We're already very emotional and we're already very easily swayed. And then if everything that's being put into our feed is something that confirms our worldview, how can we actually challenge ourselves and understand more and understand the integrity and weigh the integrity of our narrative if all that we've been fed is just something that's confirming? So how can we break from that cycle?
My solution, and every other person, everyone who works in the disinformation space or the misinformation space has a different solution. Mine, and this is because I've worked in it, was media literacy. So media literacy is teaches you how messages are created. So you know how messages are created. You also learn how to understand these messages and how they are adapted, but also how to deconstruct them. So you ask the basic question of why. Why is this happening? Who is saying this? And for what end? So when you ask yourself these 3 questions, you are allowing yourself to really rethink your worldview and to look at it out of this, let's say, biased understanding of the information that you're consuming. That becomes hard when you mix it with emotions, because disinformation is at its height when anxiety is high, when fear is high. صح? And for a lot of people, even when you tell them this is untrue, their emotion will play out. Fear is a huge driver of misinformation and of disinformation. Both fear and anger, actually. So these two negative emotions are huge drivers of misinformation and disinformation. So a lot of people don't answer to facts, they answer to emotions. So it's a lot to take in, but honestly, the best way that I found to mitigate disinformation amongst my circles, because to do this correctly, you want to establish an interpersonal trusting relationship with the person who is sharing this disinformation and tell them, oh, but have you thought about this? And have you thought about why this is happening? And because they trust you and they trust your judgment, they will start thinking about it. Kaman. There has been a study that has shown that this would work on WhatsApp in India, whereby someone would share a piece of disinformation, specifically about Muslims, and then one of the people in the groups would say, oh, I don't think that's true because this happened. And did you think about that? And the original sender would be like, oh, you're right, I didn't think about it. So there's room to discuss these things with people who share this information, especially if they are within your like echo chamber.
Okay, fantastic. So you're suggesting we build trust and then we softly challenge them. We don't go headstrong and fight them, basically.
No.
I have another question that goes along the same lines, which is it's something that's actually been very much making me very, very, very anxious, and it's about seeing young men going down the alt-right pipeline on YouTube and whatnot. So does this tactic work as well with them? I mean, it starts with Jordan Peterson, but then it ends up with, like, you know, female hatred and femicide. So how can we try and navigate through that? Do I also try and establish a trust and try and sway them and gain them to my side by using logic? Or what is my best option for that sort of?
That's a very, very good question. And something I've been struggling with, Kamen, and I think a lot of us have friends who have gone down that rabbit hole. And again, I put the responsibility on social media platforms and their shitty algorithms and their content moderation policies that don't protect us. When it comes to de-radicalizing these men, Contrapoints, so I don't know if you know Contrapoints on YouTube, but she's fucking fantastic. She is the de-radicalizer of incel culture.
Love her. I love her.
So to me, Awalan, I try to talk to my friend in a very calm way. I don't like to, like, when you tell someone they're wrong, they will believe harder that they're right. You know what I mean? You want to be very stealthy about it, and then take Contrapoints' arguments and just talk them through it. That's my recipe for de-radicalizing like people who are like followers of Jordan Peterson وهالقصص. It's a lot to deal with. I'm still figuring it out. But I look at it from a content moderation perspective. I do a lot of work on content moderation, so I put a lot of responsibility on social media platforms for allowing this kind of radicalization to happen.
Yeah,
Rami, you have a question?
Just have one little thing to say.
Sorry.
Yeah, just one little thing. I'm just saying, one of my happiest moments on YouTube was when Contrapoints made that Jordan Peterson video. I just sent it to everyone. I'm like, here you go. Yeah. Everything I have to say about him, beautifully said by her. Okay, Rami, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you, Zainab and Azza. My question is about what you said about content moderation. Do you think it's something that should be the responsibility of the social media platforms, who are themselves also like a corporation themselves, and they have their own interests? So should something that is now the new way like of sharing information and exchanging information, should the moderation be in the hands of these like corporations, or should it be regulated more by democratic bodies, if we say, or something that represents people?
Kamen, this is a debate in the content moderation circles. I personally think content moderation. So right now, let me just explain to you how content moderation works. It's centralized around specific policies that have been created in California for the world, right? That have been written vaguely. So a lot of these content moderation policies have vague language, and they're written by people with their own biases in California, but they apply to the world. Of course, platforms do engage with civil society organizations and academics to tweak these policies, but a lot of them don't change, right? And a lot of the content moderation work happens is centralized within the structure of this platform, but they outsource content moderation to low-paid, untrained content analysts بيسمون in Manila, in the Philippines, sometimes in Morocco, in our case, and in different countries where the states were able to really pay people very cheaply to do basically to sift through the worst of the internet on a daily basis. The problem here is the issue of content moderation. My issue is that these policies do not take into account context, because context allows you to actually make better decisions about the type of enforcement that you would make in a country, in one country versus another. Because they strip away context from these vague policies, you would see someone's post being taken, someone's post that would be about criticizing Hezbollah, let's say, it would be taken down as supporting this, what they call a dangerous organization. So it is labeled as support because you're talking about Hezbollah, or because you put a picture of Hassan Nasrallah on that post. So that has happened a lot, and I've been having to deal with that as well with the platforms. In terms of how, bringing in a government entity or like a sort of UN body to do the content moderation, I think that's a horrible idea. I really, really think that's a horrible, horrible, horrible idea. I think content moderation should be decentralized. So each platform has and should be decentralized and should bring in civil society and academics that are impacted by this content moderation to co-design these policies. So when you co-design policies, you are able to take into account context and to really better the content moderation application. We need to also talk about the labor practices that they do, but having a body, like a sort of oversight board that like Facebook has, is a horrible, horrible, horrible idea. لأنه like the UN, with its different political interests that allow them to make very shitty policies and pass very shitty bills, you would have the same thing when it comes to content moderation if like you bring in a governing body to do this. It's also a horrible idea to have governments in control of content moderation.
I do have a follow-up question on content moderation, if you can hear me, because it says I have an unstable internet.
Oh, right. Does anyone else have a question until
أنا
تفضل.
شو رأيك the banning of Trump on Twitter? ما بعرف if he's banned also on Facebook.
He is.
It's mostly on Twitter.
So the deplatformization قصدك. When you think about deplatforming, organizations or people. I have a two-pronged sort of approach to this. أولاً, I'm glad he's off Twitter because he has created so much harm, but at the same time there's an issue of free speech that we're talking about, and it's very tricky to work around it. صح؟ إنه أولاً, these platforms were not doing their job in protecting users from the harm of Trump's speech. It only took January 6th for them to actually do something about it, or even before, during the elections. It was ridiculous. People died, and people are continuously dying because of Trump's and his people speech. Going about deplatformization also brings me back to content moderation policies. Because when a platform decides to deplatform an organization or an individual, there are definitely political interests at heart. It's not because they like human rights. And no, if Facebook is of any indication, they don't really care about human rights, even if they have a department for human rights. It's about how they would look like. It's a PR thing. But definitely, Trump to talk to his base way, except now he has less of a reach. So you want to wait in terms of pros and cons and how this would affect the health and the safety of the people that he's been targeting. And أنا مرتاحة إنه he's not on Twitter, بس I don't have to deal with reading his tweets anymore. But he is still able to talk to his people because he has Fox News, he has ONA, and he has different outlets that peddle his speech. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing if, let's say, Gibran Basil gets deplatformed, he has OTV.
Yes, انه هيدا اللي كنت I'm unmuted. Okay. هيدا اللي كنت عم بفكر فيه انه if we ban our politician from Twitter, انه they say racist thing that could, if they were American politician, get banned for, but from the other side, in Lebanon, social media isn't as big as in the US. Most people still get information from TV as their main media. So yes. So I also had a question. How much time will it take for TV to die?
So actually, that's a good question. TV is being used. TV is still the most popular form of information gathering for people. So it's still the main source of information. But these TV outlets have also gone digital. So even if TV dies, if people cut the cable, let's say, they're still online because again, as I said in my presentation, they rebrand, they are able to adapt to technological changes and all of these things. But the thing is, and I think something that we need to understand, what's more important than TV is that people are getting their information, most of their information right now, from WhatsApp. And that's terrifying. That's completely terrifying because you can't create a flow of accountability on a WhatsApp or on a WhatsApp text or whatever. It's just maktub forwarded many times, or a video or whatever, unless the video has a logo. But still, you can't create a flow of accountability. And WhatsApp is something that we need to talk about. And all of these media outlets have WhatsApp groups because they know it's a huge market. Ana Sitte, she doesn't know much she doesn't know how to use her phone except for WhatsApp. And she gets a shit ton of information on WhatsApp and then forwards it to us. And it's a deluge of disinformation. So WhatsApp is something that's super scary. Scarier than TV for me. And it's been something I've been looking at for the last 2 years, specifically WhatsApp voice notes. And the voice notes are able to convey emotions in a way that a text can't. And when you can convey emotions and when you can feel your panic, I panic. So when I listen to a voice note that's of someone who's panicking, I would panic at the same time because I would feel, oh my God, this person is like going through something. So it's kind of something that we need to deal with and something that we need to figure out an answer to, but we don't right now.
I have a question that goes along these lines as well. You've touched on it during your talk about how you've created this new way of analyzing the media structure that's like more organic of this region as opposed to the American one. And my question has to do with content moderation. How can we try and approach content moderation? And we've also talked about like Morocco and the problems that happen with how people try and, for example, flag some Hezbollah criticism as actually support of it. How can we have these models of analysis that are more organic of our region when consuming and moderating such? What sorts of pressure can we exert on social media platforms to try and have them approach information from a region that's, that's more honest to us as people? Yeah, I suppose this is my.
So the way I go about it is that I am on social media mostly to observe and to track and to document. When you document instances of violations of their content moderation policies and you create a file and then you send it to this to the policy team, you actually show them, oh, they're doing a bad job. It's a long process. It's very tiring. But it's something that I've been doing and I found to be a good way to have a channel with social media platforms to give them an idea, their content moderation policies are shit in this region. When it comes to كمان, when we talk about organic reach, it's really hard to يعني مثلا you would see the things, the trending hashtags on Twitter, you would see them as organic reach, بس إنه the retweets and the quote retweet وهالقصص, that's not organic, right? This is like just increasing traffic. And each platform has policy teams based in the region. All of them are in Dubai. And this is also something that we need to take into consideration. They are in Dubai for a reason, because it's just, and they find it as safer, but also because there are political reasons why it's in Dubai and why a lot of these content moderation policies in our region and in our country are not applied very well. And Dubai is one of these reasons. The location is one of these reasons. And again, foreign interests are a key component of understanding the kind of content that we see on social media, but also on our media. So the same pressures that you see of foreign interests, and the same pressures that foreign interests put on our media and on our politicians are the same to social media, on social media platforms on a company basis and on the way that they do content moderation.
Okay. When it comes to also information on Twitter and whatnot, and tweeting and co-tweeting, and it was something that I told you, it was a loop that I fell into when I first got on Twitter in October 2019. But I ended up finding a guy on Twitter. His name is Mark Owen Jones. He's a professor in Qatar, and trend able to speak English. So do you have any alternative people that we can, guide some people to who actually do these trend analysis, sorts of that are not just in English?
قطش صوتك شوي. بس Mahmoud does this all the time. He does fact checks mostly, but no, he also talks about sometimes the هول الهاشتاجز وشو عم بيصير والترافيك. So Mahmoud Al-Ghazayel, who's right here. There's Mark Owen Jones. He does things related to Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Egypt sometimes. There is Khadija Ramali, who does stuff related to Libya specifically. There's Wafa Haikal, who looks at Egypt. مين في كمان؟ أنا مرات بس إنه كمان I don't do the big analyses that Mark Owen Jones does. يعني I look at it, I rant about it, and then that's it. And then I send it to social media platforms.
Zaid, can we have your Twitter handle?
Yes. So ما بدي احكي كثير لانه حاسس بس انا عم بسال بس I know انه in Estonia they regulated social media algorithm but I'm not sure how. Do you know anything about it?
No, I don't know how you can regulate an algorithm. An algorithm is a piece of code. And if you want to regulate algorithm, you need to change the entire structure of a social media platform, which is kind of very difficult to do, considering that these social media platforms are all headquartered in the US and abide by US law.
I heard it on like the Joe Rogan podcast مع the guy اللي عامل شو اسمه شو اسمه dilemma, the documentary on social
Tristan
media.
Harris. Tristan Harris, The Social Dilemma.
Yes, هيدا.
بدك بتستان Harris, go watch Code Bias on Netflix now. Thank you.
Okay.
Tristan Harris, I have a lot of feelings about Tristan Harris that are not professional. So I would prefer that you go watch Coded Bias to really understand algorithmic bias. The way that the social dilemma framed it was a very simplistic and over. All of these are the people that they interviewed are all of the people who created the mess, and they're all white guys who created this mess, and then they're saying, "Oops, we don't use social media because of the mess we created." So I think it's really important to watch Coded Bias because it gives you a better idea of how to approach social media and how to approach platforms and algorithmic bias.
But I think there's a difference between creating something that you think at the time is good and then eventually figuring out how this plays out in the real world, because we've seen this happen so many times. I mean, technology works so much faster and it evolves so much faster as well. So one thing that goes out there could be initially created as something good and eventually turns out to be like having a bad impact. So I think that personally, I like the social dilemma, so this is why maybe I feel like this is a way to simplify in terms that people understand, because not everyone wants to hear that social media is bad for you, or that the algorithm is not good, or that whatever these things are that we say among each other, because we are all here because we're interested to hear about it. But I feel like this is something that needs to get into pop culture as well, and needs to be more simple and accessible to people.
Definitely. I think it should be accessible to people, but I don't think that it's only men who should take up space to talk about it. Because وغير هيك, I remember very clearly when I watched The Social Dilemma, one of the guys they interviewed was the person who created the current business model of Facebook, which is based on advertising. And that's why Facebook is one of the two biggest advertisers in the world. And basically created the whole idea of sponsored وكل هالقصص. I definitely agree with you in the social dilemma is a good primer on issues related to algorithms and content moderation or social media in general. But I think it also oversimplifies things. لأنه they had Shoshana for 36 seconds talking about surveillance capitalism, which is the scourge of social media. And none of these guys would say surveillance capitalism, because the business model is literally surveillance capitalism. And أكتر من هيك, all of the discourse that you saw in the social dilemma, of course, the digital rights community have been, and by the digital rights community, I mean specifically people from the global south who have been talking about these things for at least 10 years. So it was, just speaking from my experience and from the community I come from, it was like, أولاً, I was happy this topic was being talked about and it's become a Netflix documentary. But two, it felt like I was being silenced, and a lot of the work that me and my peers was just being co-opted by a bunch of white guys. So that's why I think coded bias, أولاً, it goes deeper into this topic and brings a wide array of people from different contexts to talk about algorithmic bias in a much more realistic way. It's a much more realistic view of social media. But I think definitely it's a good primer. The social dilemma is a good primer, but it's not good enough.
I agree with you really wholeheartedly about this, but I feel like this is more a question of director, because basically Center for Humane Technology, which is the center for that Don has co-founded and everything, it's the same one that is behind Coded Bias as well, so they sponsor it as well. Although the director for Coded Bias is different than the one for the social dilemma, and this is where I agree with you that there should be more representation, just like there should be more representation everywhere for women, for Black people, for all like the communities. And I do agree with you on that. But like, yeah, this is where my point.
I have a question. You said this actually. Can anyone hear me? Cool. I'm having connectivity problems. I don't know why, especially just today. Okay, you said something that was quite striking in your presentation about we can come together to create healthier media, information creating and reporting and consuming cycles. How can you suggest we can do that as Secular Club or Secular Club alumni, as investigative journalists and whatnot? How can we create healthier circles and try and reach out further into society?
I think from the experience of Megaphone, I think what has worked really well is investigative journalism, because we are lacking in Lebanon. The kind of media we have is not accountability journalism. It does not hold those in power accountable, right? What Megaphone, what the public source, what sometimes Beirut Today tries to do is to hold those in power accountable, which is at the source of a very good, at the source of the profession in its original sense. So the journalists' actual true profession is to hold those in power accountable. And I think that holds true as well of grassroots movements and of activist groups, because we do not have a checks and balances system in this country. صح? Find a different alleyway that, and for Megaphone, the way to do that was through investigations and through creating a new media discourse. Kamen, like I said, Megaphone is great. I love it so much, but its reach is limited. So لازم يكون في تفكير political economy of the media هلا اللي هو شكله is a vicious cycle of clientelistic relationships and power relations, and we can't think of a media without getting rid of this regime. So you need to get rid of this regime, but with it you need to get rid of the media structure as it is. But something that we can do now is to really create more opposition voices, through investigations, through accountability journalism, through open source investigations. كل هول these are all good things that make someone powerful get scared. بيرج خلاص.
Okay, fantastic. I think I have another question that can go in line about, pulling the carpet from under their feet. And you talked about whole cycle is based on the money funded from these big families and whatnot. And I'm wondering, how can we shift these power relations in Lebanon? Because not all of the you said not all of the media is controlled by them. It's more than half, but still, how can we try and maybe shift more power towards the other less than half of media in Lebanon? And also, I'm wondering, how can we have a healthier relationship when it comes to engaging with information? How can we have a more investigative one of like, how can I recommend, like, maybe train people around me and myself to question the information that comes my way in a healthy way, and fact check these things? Can we build these attitudes into people?
So in my presentation, I said 12 families own or are on the board of almost half of the media outlets, but the rest of them are actually owned by political parties. So هولي في عندك تيار.org is owned by the Free Patriotic Movement. صوت الشعب is owned by the Lebanese Communist Party. المنار وشو اسمه إذاعة النور is owned by حزب الله. You either have the families or the political parties or people adjacent to them like إبراهيم الأمين وغيرهم. So شيلك عن the current traditional structure. But when it comes to investigative journalism, it's a lot like, it's literally hypothesis testing. It's a research paper. You need to have a research question, you need to have an angle, you need to have a methodology, and you need to have a clear timeline of your work. And this is how investigative journalism works. It's hypothesis testing. When it comes to fact-checking is going to the roots of journalism, and it's asking yourself 5 questions. Who, what, why, when, and how. 5 questions. And this is at the root of fact-checking. When you want to مثلا fact-check a picture or a video, it becomes a bit more complicated, but there are software to do this through either reverse image search, through getting keyframes of videos and doing reverse image search on those. But at the core of it is answering these 5 questions. That's how you fact check.
Does anyone else have any questions that we can ask? Because I feel like I'm hugging the whole thing for myself.
Yeah, yes. So I wanted to say something about uh, my favorite reportage of Megaphone was the one they made in I think Hersh al-Ghuraba in Trablus. I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure the exact name of the place, but it was very fascinating because you see in traditional media everything is basically revolving around Beirut. You have like صوت Beirut, Beirut اليوم وكل هول. So and I also remember hearing Jean Assir saying that he want to focus more on a regional or like focusing on something on towns outside Beirut. So how is it going on, and like uh, how are you planning to develop it?
So أنا I did a few investigations لميجافون وبعدني like part of the group of Megaphone, but I've taken a step back from actually doing investigations and like working in the news for Megaphone. But any media outlet has a sort of editorial priorities that they give themselves and they work on together. And they have pitch meetings every week where they say, okay, this is something happening in this region or in this in this part of the country or in this part of in this area, and we need to because we see it being taught in mainstream media. So that's a little bit of the kind of things that Megaphone does internally. إنه بيصير في كتير حكي بالموضوع يعني it's a lot of back and forth about it to a lot of listening and asking questions and throwing ideas. And then when someone says okay في شخصين بيركبوا بالسيارة بيروحوا بيصوروا بيرجعوا. That's it.
I have a question that goes in line with investigative journalism, especially in other like regions outside of Beirut. So one of this stretch to debate against or actually contend with is that of Muqawamah versus Israel. Even though like I'm utterly pro-Palestine, I still am utterly anti-Muqawamah, but it's really hard to try and divorce myself from that false dichotomy. If I wasn't with them, then I'm with the enemy. And let's say if I want to actually do some sort of investigative journalism in Hezbollah stronghold areas, how can I put forward information that is going to undermine them and show how hideous a lot of their policies and approaches are, without actually making myself fall into the trap of their false dichotomies and without being, labeled as a traitor, or some sort of an agent for Israel or whatnot?
That's never going to happen. It's something that goes against someone else's worldview. That's what happens. You get في prejudice, في شو اسمه في aggression towards the person who is threatening one's worldview. So like when you're basically trying to say, you want to do an investigation that looks at Hezbollah structure or whatever, well, you need to take into account to be very dangerous for you or anyone. ففيها الdanger factor, بس كمان let's say that you are able to do it, people react very negatively when you are threatening their worldview. So whether or not your intention is for them to warm up to the idea, بيضل في أشخاص label you as that. في خلص there's a loyal base. مثل ما بأي political party تاني ما وقفت على شو اسمه قاعدة حزب الله أو شيء هيك كلهم هيك.
Absolutely, every single one of them is like that, and it's just as threatening. But for me, what I was thinking of is for example, it's such a big thing to be labeled as like, you know, a traitor to Israel. It's, for me, it's like one of the worst evils in the Middle East, and it puts so much danger on your life to be labeled as such, because people can literally just go out of their way and kill you or hurt your family and loved ones because of that. And I was thinking of what happened to Ziad Aitani, just because of like that whole lying thing. His whole life was destroyed completely. And so the thing is, like, what if I know some truths and I want to tell this truth, or I want to investigate some of these truths? How can I make sure that I'm somewhat safe, or at least if not myself, how can I make sure that my loved ones are safe? How can I report truth, or how can I debate some sort of false narratives and contend against some sort of false information without threatening the safety of myself or my loved
Takes
sorry, I cut you off. In that sense, like, are there any channels where you can do that and just maintain at least maybe your anonymity, or whatnot?
Anonymity صعبة. Reddit is not anonymous, so that's not the no. It's hard to talk about these things. I know there are a lot of structures to investigative journalism, but open source investigations are a way to, when you have a lack of access to information, which is very prevalent in our country and countries بالجوار كلها everywhere, open source investigation will, they're a lot more consuming, they're a lot more hard to do, although I find them fun to do, because you're piecing together a puzzle, and you're trying to solve a mystery. I don't know if you watched the Megaphone investigation on Azza El-Masri, but that's one I worked on, where I basically was able to identify around 30 of these حراس and found them on Facebook, and through that I was able to get footage from there and be able to corroborate who was where in August 8 and doing what. And that's a lot of work and it takes a lot of time, and it's also very dangerous. So it takes a long time to really do an investigative piece. It takes months usually. It takes months or a few weeks to do any sort of investigation. But I think what we are thinking, what you're talking about, and how do I stay safe? It's a gamble. It's always a risk. It's always a risk. You need to تحطي pros and cons and say if you're willing to live with that risk. Of course, there are also some things that you can do to protect yourself digitally, so digital security. But physical risk is a big issue كمان. ما بعرف to be I would say open source investigations is the way to go.
Yeah, you're so convincing. It makes me feel like I want to do it, even though I'm a mathematician. Like now I have a notepad that just has investigative journalism, and then yet again investigative journalism. Look more into that. So here you go, making me like reconsider my life plans. I think this can be pretty much it. Do you have any further recommendation for us, like as we move forward from this talk? How can we use it in the most generative way possible? If anyone has other questions, by the way, I don't want to. Yeah.
إذا ما حدا عنده سؤال, I think my biggest advice here is to always critically question information. I'm not saying, think of everything as fake. I'm saying ask the questions that you wouldn't normally ask, like why, who said it, and how. And try to find corroborations, because again, the media in our country is a lot it's copy paste, right? So one person, one media outlet would say something, and then you would find the exact same terminology and same sentences being copy pasted in everywhere else. So it's really important to ask pertinent questions, and to also keep in mind, accountability is not just a journalistic mission, but it's also a mission in grassroots movements. So yeah, that's basically it.
Fantastic. So I suppose this is all the time we have today. Thank you very much, Azza, for this amazing talk, and very enlightening. There's so much to look forward to look into after this talk. So on behalf of Azza and myself, I thank you guys very much for joining us today. And hopefully you can also join us for further events at the AUB Secular Club. Have a lovely rest of your weekend, and I think rest well for those of us who have an exam tomorrow morning. Yeah.
Bye.
Yet. And, thank you very much.
Bye. Nice to meet you all.
Bye. Thank you.